Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron, and it's time for another edition of Budget Magic. So today we have a super sweet deck. I have not been this excited about a Budget Magic deck in a long time. This one is just so unique, so super fun to play, and apparently surprisingly competitive. So anyway, I'm talking about Mono Green Aurora for Standard. As you can see, $46 in the paper world, 20 ticks online, so essentially an ultra budget deck right off the bat. You can't get any cheaper than that for a standard deck. A quick reminder before we get to the videos, if you enjoy the video content like Budget Magic here on MTG Goldfish, take a minute, like the video, subscribe to the channel. It's a big favor for us, and it keeps you up to date on all the new video content that's coming out. Anyway, let's talk Mono Green Aurora in Standard. So, you've probably seen the Great Aurora be played. Is he play in some of the season's past stacks as like a one-of value card? Well, we are an all-in Great Aurora combo deck. So, the Great Aurora, 9 mana, each player shuffles all the cards from his or her hand and all the permanents he or she owns into his or her library, then draws that many cards, and then each player can put any number of lands from his or her hand onto the battlefield. Notice they come into play untapped, and then you exile the Great Aurora, so you can't keep looping it. So basically, the Great Aurora is standard upheaval. It takes a little more work to make good in upheaval. Upheaval you can just kind of ramp a lot and it's good enough. The Great Aurora is a little more challenging because it's more expensive and because it helps your opponent as well. The thing that makes upheaval so broken is you float a bunch of mana, cast an upheaval, everything bounces back to everyone's hands. You get to immediately replay stuff because it's your main phase, and you probably have a bunch of fast mana, so you just like dump as much of your hand as possible back on the board. When your opponent untaps with their entire battlefield in their hand, plays a land, says go, discards most of their cards, and you just win the game. The Great Aurora doesn't work like that because it lets the opponent put all their lands back onto the battlefield as well, so it's kind of a fixed upheaval, but we can still break this in 2 ways. So first off, the first thing we do to break the Great Aurora is we break the symmetry. So since each player is drawing equal to the number of cards in hands and permanents they have on the battlefield, we take and try to get more permanents on the battlefield or more cards in our hand. So when we cast the Great Aurora, maybe our opponent's drawing 12 cards and we're drawing 17. Or our opponent's drawing 15 and we're drawing 30. Over the course of the game, that adds up to a huge advantage. We're just drawing so many more cards than our opponent that eventually that advantage takes over the game. The Gaia's Revenge, I'm very happy about. This is the finisher in the deck. I took a long time thinking through how to actually finish the games. So there's a couple problems. My first thoughts were like a red X burn spell to just 20 an opponent, part the Water Veil to go into the extra turns loop. The problem is, those plans scoop to negate, and the Great Aurora already is pretty weak to negate. You're tapping out for a 9 mana sorcery. If your opponent can negate it, that's pretty bad. The other thing I wanted to avoid was letting our opponent untap and kill our stuff. Yeah, you can play Ulamog or Worldbreaker, and that's fine, and those are powerful cards, but if you play a Great Aurora, draw a bunch of cards, play an Ulamog, let your opponent pass, they can just Declaration and Stone it, and you basically got nothing for all this work. You could easily go on to lose the game. Well, Gaia's Revenge is the answer. So the idea is that we will be able to cast 2, 3, 4 Gaia's Revenge in the same turn after sometimes multiple Great Auroras, generating a ton of mana, and Gaia's Revenge not only has haste, and 8 power, and can't be countered, it can't be targeted by non-green spells or abilities from non-green sources, so it is essentially hexproof in Standard, like very close to hexproof. So this is a way where after we cast the Great Aurora, we win the game without letting our opponent untap. So Great Aurora, we tap all our lands, cast a Great Aurora, hopefully have some mana floating, draw a whole bunch of cards, put all our lands into play, tap all our lands again, float more mana, cast another Great Aurora, put all our lands into play. Eventually we're going to have maybe no cards in our library, only a handful of cards left in our library, and our entire library is going to be in our hand, and that's going to mean we have 3 or 4 copies of Gaia's Revenge in our hand, and we're going to have a ton of mana floating and a bunch of untapped lands for the Great Aurora. So we just Gaia's Revenge, Gaia's Revenge, Gaia's Revenge, Gaia's Revenge, swing with everything. That plan can get disrupted by maybe Avacyn, depending on our opponent's life total and how many Gaia's Revenge we have, because they can play Avacyn with Flash, can also be disrupted by Secure the Waste. That's the biggest issue. But I will take Secure the Waste, being weak to Secure the Waste, over being weak to Negate, which is in a ton of decks these days, or letting our opponent untap to play sorcery speed stuff. I will take being weak to Secure the Ways over any of that stuff any day of the week. So that's the basic plan of the deck. That's how we finish the game, the Great Aurora plus Gaia's Revenge. As far as breaking the symmetry of the deck, Tireless Tracker is the key card. So Tireless Tracker is just a super powerful card. It's actually half the cost of the deck. That's how important it is. We're spending half of our budget on Tireless Tracker. Tireless Tracker does two really important things for our deck. First off, we are a ramp deck. As we go through the rest of the slides, you will see we are playing a ton of ramp cards, and one of the weaknesses of ramp is it doesn't really do anything until you cast your Great Aurora or your Ulamog or your other huge expensive thing. All you're doing is putting lands on the battlefield. Tireless Tracker fixes that by letting you get clues as well. So not only are you getting lands on the battlefield, but since you get a clue whenever a land enters the battlefield, you cast an Explosive Vegetation, it's get 2 lands, get 2 clues, which you can pay 4 mana to draw 2 cards, which cycles you through your deck and helps you keep finding your finishers. It's just super key. But with the Great Aurora, the real trick of Tireless Tracker is we make a ton of clue tokens and they count towards the Great Aurora. So we play a bunch of lands, play a bunch of ramp spells that get us lands. Eventually we have 6, 8, 10 clue tokens on the table. So when we Great Aurora, each of our clue tokens is drawing us an extra card from the Great Aurora. Presumably our opponent doesn't have that. So we are drawing way more cards than our opponent, so even without the game-ending Gaia's Revenge loop, our Great Auroras are helping us way more than they're helping our opponent. We're getting more lands on the battlefield, more cards in our hand, we're able to recover faster because we are drawing into ramp cards, so we rebuild really quick, and often after the Great Aurora, we draw into Tireless Trackers, play more ramp spells, get a bunch more clues, and our Great Auroras get progressively better and better as the game goes on. That's one of the cool things I realized about playing this deck, is our first Great Aurora often is relatively equal. Maybe our opponent draws 12, we draw 15 or 14, pretty close to being the same. Then the second Great Aurora, because of how our deck is built, we're usually close to doubling up on our opponent. Maybe they draw 15, maybe not quite doubling up. We draw 25, say. The third one, we're almost always doubling or even more our opponent. They draw 15, we draw, let's say 30. And then there's times when we're drawing our entire deck, like 40 plus cards with the Great Aurora, while your opponent's drawing like 17 or 20. So each Great Aurora gets better and better and shifts the game more and more in our favor. So that's why Tireless Tracker is there, to make a bunch of clues for our Tireless Trackers. Here's all of our ramp. These are the ramp cards that work really well with Tireless Tracker because they're searching out lands. These cards also ramp us into the Great Aurora. We want to be able to cast Great Aurora with as much mana floating as possible, as quickly as possible. That's the entire idea of the deck. So we are overloaded on ramp cards. And the sweet thing about these cards is, even without Tireless Tracker and the clue tokens, they are adding multiple permanents to the battlefield. They are essentially 2-for-1s, or even 3-for-1s if we have Spell Mastery with Nissa's Pilgrimage, and Nissa's Renewal, actually, all the time, in regards to the Great Aurora. So we're playing one spell from our hand, getting 2 permanents on the battlefield, lands, with Explosive Vegetation. If we have a Tireless Tracker, we are playing 1 Explosive Vegetation, getting 4 permanents on the battlefield, so we are shifting the math significantly when it comes to Great Aurora with these ramp spells, in conjunction with Tireless Tracker, but also just by themselves. In Nissa's Pilgrimage, we search 3 lands, 1 goes on the battlefield, 2 in our hand, so 1 card is getting us 3 draws with the Great Aurora. Nissa's Renewal is doing the same thing while gaining us life to keep us alive until we can start comboing off with the Great Aurora. So that's what makes these cards so good. Then we have the bad ramp package. Leaf Gilder and Hedron Crawler. Leaf Gilder is essentially Hedron Crawler number 5. The reason we have Hedron Crawlers as a 4 of and just 1 Leaf Gilder is because our deck isn't really interested in attacking with our 2-drop. That's not what this deck is about. When we're going to win on 1 big, huge combo turn. That's the entire idea of the deck. So getting in incidental 2 points of damage isn't especially important or even likely to happen. Hedron Crawler, on the other hand, taps for colorless, and we do have some colorless cards in our sideboard that require colorless mana, so that's why we have more Hedron Crawlers. And then we also have Hedron Archive, which isn't that bad. The thing about Hedron Crawler the thing about Hedron Archive is not only does it tap for mana, but our deck gets so many lands on the battlefield. We often have 15 lands, 20 lands on the battlefield, that a 6 mana colorless divination isn't that bad for us. We have so much mana that we can afford to play 6 mana divinations, so it ramps us when we need it to ramp us, and in the late game, it's just a 6 mana colorless divination, which might sound horrible, but when you consider the pure amount of mana that this deck produces, it actually isn't that bad. Then we have the rest of the mana base for Foundry of the Consoles, basically just another colorless source for our sideboard cards, plus it can make some flyers, chump for a turn. It does also create 2 permanents from 1 card for the Great Aurora, so we can sack Foundry at the end of our opponent's turn, gets us 2 flyers, so we're drawing 2 cards off of the Great Aurora instead of just the 1 we would draw from the Foundry. And then 19 forests, so pretty basic mana base. In the sideboard, we have a pretty interesting mixture of cards. So for Revealing Wind is a fog. And the idea of this one is some matchups, first off, we just want it on its front half. We ramp really fast and really efficiently, but sometimes we just need that 1 extra turn to get to our Great Aurora and take over the game against aggressive decks. The other thing is, it's really sweet after the Great Aurora against decks that can flash things in. We play against some decks that are playing Rattle Chains or Avacyn or Secure the Waste, and they're like, okay, go ahead and Great Aurora, we get all these untapped lands, you draw us into a Secure the Waste, we Secure the Waste X10, and we're going to attack you for lethal. Well, we have Revealing Winds to fizzle that attack, and then untap and play another even better Great Aurora that generates us even more advantage. So that's the idea of Revealing Winds. Spatial Contortion is just a removal spell. Same with Warping Whale, it's a removal spell that can also counter something or ramp. Honestly, I didn't bring them in hardly at all. Well, I'm not sure if I brought them in ever, actually. And then Naturalize is more a testament to the lack of good green sideboard cards in Standard than it is, especially budget ones, than it is about the card. 4 Naturalize is definitely excessive, but there's just not a lot of good cheap mono green sideboard cards. If you're playing non-budget, Worldbreaker would definitely be a better option here because we produce so much mana, we have colorless lands. It would be an interesting sideboard option, but we make do with it. And again, the main deck is pretty tight and focused, like a Storm combo deck in Legacy or Modern, where you don't have that many spaces for moving things around, at least in my experience with the deck. Anyway, that's the mono green Aurora. The deck is super sweet. You got to think of it like I said, like a Storm combo deck where you're building up all these resources. The storming off takes place over several turns because your rituals are ramp cards, but you are ritualing over the course of a few turns, generating a ton of permanents thanks to Tireless Tracker and all the ramp spells, and then eventually you Great Aurora into Great Aurora into Great Aurora into Great Aurora, play all your guys' revenges, and kill your opponent in one shot. It is super spicy and surprisingly effective. Anyway, I'll let you get to the videos. Thank you very much for watching the Mono Green Aurora Budget Magic. I hope you enjoy them, and I will talk to you soon.